What is up, party people? Welcome back to another Cattablah video. When we talk video games, most people think games like Mario Brothers or Sonic or a Hello Kitty Island adventure. Well, I'm here to talk about another huge genre of games, sports video games, and more specifically, how they match up with the real thing. So let's delve into the world of sports video games. Just to give everyone a little backstory on the history of sports video games, most people think the first video game was Pong in 1972. Well, that's wrong, stupid. One of the first, if not the first video game ever created, and certainly the first sports video game, was called Tennis for Two. It was a game created by physicist William Higginbotham, maybe, if that's how you pronounce it, and was played on an analog computer using an oscilloscope as a display. Now, even Helen Keller could tell this game doesn't really have a close resemblance to tennis, but it laid the groundwork for future sports video games, and that they were indeed possible to make. So now that we have that out of the way, let's see how sports video games match up to the real thing. In the spirit of already having talked about tennis, why don't we take a look at some tennis games? First on the list is one of the earliest tennis games, with the extremely imaginative name, Tennis, for the Atari 2600. My god, is that Serena and Vanessa Williams out there? Oh, no, that's just Tennis for the Atari. I thought I was watching Wimbledon for a minute there. Okay, yeah, this was an early game when the technology wasn't there yet. I guess the green background kind of looks like the color of grass. So overall, probably an 8 out of 10 on the realistic scale. So how about we look at a current tennis game so we can compare what the latest and greatest graphics look like compared to the real thing. So here's a comparison of AO International Tennis, released in 2018, and a real-life match of tennis. Not too bad, actually. A lot of the movements are quite similar. Even subtle nuances like scuffs on the court from highly traveled areas, and even the way players often spin the racket in their hands while waiting for the ball to be hit at them. Overall, I think the developers did pretty well with tennis and making it lifelike. Now on to America's favorite pastime, baseball. The sport of baseball has been around for quite a long time, tracing its root back to Britain and Ireland in the 1700s. With such a long history, there must be some decent video games made on the subject, right? Well, let's take a look. Now, obviously, I'm not going to miss a chance to show how awful the early iterations of baseball looked, so let's take a look at the 1983 NES game Baseball. I'm starting to get the feeling that the people they chose to name these games were either children or drunk adults. Anyways, let's continue. You can see that they try and create depth in the game, with the art style and the way the outfielders move slower than the infielders. Overall though, with the lack of music, basic sound effects, and clunky movements, it's about as interesting as the actual sport. Which is not very, and I even used to play it. Now let's take the latest and greatest baseball games and compare it to the actual sport. Wow, not bad actually. The movements are quite fluid and the graphics are pretty good. They got the depth and shadows nailed down too. Jesus! Even the reflection off the helmets is pretty awesome. Now for a look at the real thing. Well, overall I'd say it's fairly close, minus the horrible, possibly acid-burn faces of the video game. Even the way they do the small movements like sauntering down to a walk after finishing running the bases. I give it a solid 6 out of 7. Alright, let's take a look at one of the only things Canada's known for, maple syrup. Just kidding. I am of course talking about hockey. One of the most popular sports in North America, with the NHL being the strongest professional league in the world. Surely there must be some very true-to-form hockey video games out there. Let me show you a hockey game from my childhood that I feel really embodies actual hockey, and I'm going to let you listen to the realistic sound effects that were a staple of the game. Yep, that was spot on hockey there. From the fights right down to the pantsing octopus. Just another day in the NHL. Okay, so seriously now, let's take a look at one of the latest NHL video games and see if it's up to snuff with the real thing. Well, with first impressions, the graphics are decent enough, but the movement seems really clunky and jerky. Not really fluid like the real thing. Let's take a look at what actual hockey looks like. You'll notice their movements are all very fluid. You don't see any of those jerky, instant turning movements that doesn't seem physically possible. Overall, I'd say the NHL game is one of the least realistic looking ones we've seen so far. Now on to my favorite sport, and one that I take personal offense to for how they portray it in video games. I am, of course, talking about volleyball. If there is one sport that is totally unrealistic in all aspects when they transferred over to video games, it's volleyball. To understand the ridiculousness of it all, let's take a look at some of the origins of video game volleyball. US Championship V-Ball, released in 1988 as an arcade game and ported to the NES in 1990 under the name Super Spike V-Ball, is the first game I'll look at. And keep in mind, this was the 15th iteration of volleyball game released. So what does this game look like? Well, of course, it's beach volleyball, so there are two players on each side of the court, and naturally every team is made up of two totally jacked twins wearing mankinis, as is customary in volleyball. As if that wasn't realistic enough, every player can of course jump into friggin' outer space, and when you hit somebody with a hard spike, you pretty much send them to the Shadow Realm. It's all good fun though. You have to make the game quirky and interesting for a wide variety of players, so I don't blame them. Now, on to the present day games versus the real thing. What in the flipping crap is this? Did that guy just hit the ball with his stupid head? What the hell was that? They have a ghost on their team working as their invisible 7th player? This is one of the biggest pieces of steamy garbage poop I've ever seen. Let's show you what actual volleyball looks like. See? None of that janky, head-hitting, ghost-playing baloney. Overall, I'd say the volleyball remakes are not very good, and they are definitely not true to what actual volleyball is. Well, now that you've seen a few of the examples of video game developers attempting to recreate sports, I'm sure you can come to your own conclusions about which ones are done well and which aren't. It is definitely a lot more apparent as to where the shortfalls are if you've actually played the sport. And there are definitely quite a few that do well in recreating the look and feel of a sport. But there are definitely more flops along the way where they completely miss the mark. Well, anyways, thanks for stopping by and watching our video. If you like what you saw, please leave a like and subscribe so you can catch more of our content. And on that note, goodbye for now.